She was my boss, untouchable, unshakable, until the night she whispered, "I'll lose everything." And all I could say was, "Accept me." The office was never meant to feel this intimate. By day it was a place of sharp angles and steady footsteps, voices clipped with deadlines and decisions. But at night, under the softened glow of a single desk lamp, the space seemed to breathe differently. Shadows stretched along the glass walls, the city lights outside flickered faintly like a distant constellation, and the hum of the building's heating system was the only steady rhythm. It was close to midnight, yet I wasn't the only one still here. Across the floor, she sat behind her wide oak desk, her blazer folded neatly over the back of her chair, her sleeves rolled up just above the elbows. For once, she looked less like the unshakable executive everyone admired, and more like a woman fighting to keep exhaustion at bay. The loose strands of her dark hair framed her face in a way I'd never seen during the day, softer, almost vulnerable. I told myself I was staying late to finish the quarterly reports, but if I was honest, part of me was drawn by her presence. There was something magnetic about the way she carried herself, even now, head bent slightly, pen tapping faintly against paper, the crease between her brows deepening with every line she read. She wasn't just my boss, she was the kind of woman who made an entire room recalibrate when she walked in. And yet, in this moment, she looked so entirely human. I cleared my throat softly, breaking the spell. "Still at it?" My voice sounded louder than intended in the quiet space. She glanced up, her expression softening when she saw me. "I could ask you the same." Her tone was warm but tinged with fatigue, and there was something in her eyes, the faintest shimmer of weariness she rarely allowed anyone to see. I shrugged, trying to mask the truth with a half-smile. "Thought I'd keep the company." That earned me the smallest curve of her lips, not quite a laugh, but enough to feel like I'd shifted the weight in the room. She leaned back, stretching her fingers across the desk, then pinched the bridge of her nose. For a moment, she didn't look like my boss at all. She just looked tired. Human. As I walked closer to drop a file onto her desk, my hand brushed against hers. It was an accident, but the contact was electric, her skin warm against mine, a fleeting connection that lingered in the silence. She didn't move away immediately, and neither did I. Something unspoken passed between us in that pause. The kind of silence that felt louder than words, heavy with meaning we both pretended not to acknowledge. She finally pulled her hand back, smoothing the paper as though it had been nothing. But the way her eyes lingered on mine for just a fraction too long told another story. In that quiet office, surrounded by shadows and the low hum of the city, I realized something I couldn't quite admit. This late-night stillness wasn't about work anymore. It was about her. About the way the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of us. And deep down, I knew she felt it too. The silence in the office stretched out, comfortable yet heavy. The soft patter of rain against the tall glass windows filled the space, a sound that always made the city feel more distant, more fragile. She had returned to her papers, but the rhythm of her movements was slower now, less precise. For the first time, I noticed the tremor in her hand as she set her pen down. I lingered near her desk longer than I needed to, pretending to skim through the file I'd brought over. But my attention kept pulling back to her, the way her shoulders slumped slightly when she thought no one was watching, the faint crease at the edge of her mouth, betraying strain. "You ever stop?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice gentle, not intrusive. Her head lifted, eyes narrowing faintly, not in irritation, but as if she were weighing how much to let me see. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "When you run a company like this, you don't get the luxury of stopping." She leaned back in her chair then, exhaling a breath that seemed to deflate her usual sharpness. She slipped the glasses she sometimes wore for reading off her face and set them carefully on the desk, rubbing at the bridge of her nose. Without that usual barrier, her eyes looked different, clearer, tired, but deeply human. "Truth is," she began, her voice dropping to something closer to a whisper, "sometimes I wonder how much longer I can keep this all together." She gestured loosely at the folders stacked high, the glowing laptop screen, the empire she carried on her shoulders. There are days it feels like I'm holding the whole building up with my own 2 hands. One wrong move, and it all comes crashing down. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. I studied her, seeing her not as the untouchable leader everyone else feared or admired, but as a woman who carried weight far heavier than most could imagine. The lamplight cast a soft halo against her hair, and in the shadows, her vulnerability became something almost luminous. "You don't have to do it all alone," I murmured, surprised at my own courage. Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp, searching, before softening again. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she wanted to believe me. But then she let out a low laugh, not cruel, but tinged with disbelief. "That's easy to say. Everyone depends on me, my employees, my investors, my reputation." Her fingers traced the edge of a folder absent-mindedly, as though grounding herself in its sharp, certain lines. "And what about you?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Who do you depend on?" That made her pause. She didn't answer right away, just sat there with her gaze fixed on the rain outside, the city lights blurring through the glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more fragile than I'd ever heard it. "No one. That's the point." The words cut deeper than I expected. Something in me ached at the thought, this woman who seemed to command everything, who carried herself with such strength, secretly standing on a foundation of loneliness. I wanted to reach for her, to take that weight from her shoulders, but instead I stayed still. The distance between us became charged, a fragile line neither of us dared to cross yet. And yet, in her pause, and the way her eyes lingered on me as if she'd said too much, I realized, for the first time, she had let me see the cracks in her armor. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the wide windows like an impatient hand. The office, usually a place of clipped voices and calculated decisions, now felt like a sanctuary sealed off from the world. Her words still lingered in the air. "No one. That's the point." I couldn't shake them. She had gone quiet after that, her gaze lost in the city lights bleeding through the glass, as if searching for answers beyond the skyline. For a long while either of us spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the lamp, the storm beyond, and the occasional shuffle of paper beneath her hands. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not this close, not in this role. She was my boss, a woman who built her image on composure and authority. But tonight, her mask had slipped, just enough to reveal the fragile human beneath. And something in me, against every ounce of reason, wanted to protect that vulnerability. I found myself standing closer to her desk than I realized, watching her shoulders tighten and release with each breath. Her hands rested on the polished wood, pale fingers curled faintly as if holding on to the edge of something unseen. Without thinking, I reached forward. My hand brushed against hers. It wasn't deliberate at first, but once the contact happened, I didn't move away. Her skin was warm, warmer than I expected, and trembling ever so slightly. For a moment, she didn't withdraw. Instead, she froze, her breath catching, her eyes shifting down to where our hands touched. The silence grew heavier. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing into me, warning me that this was a line we weren't supposed to cross. But I also felt the undeniable truth in it, the closeness either of us could keep pretending didn't exist. Her eyes lifted slowly to mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't before: disbelief, relief, and a flicker of something far more dangerous: longing. The rain outside intensified, as if the world itself conspired to trap us in this fragile cocoon. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I could hear her breath, uneven and unguarded. I tightened my fingers around hers, not enough to claim, only enough to steady. It felt like grounding both of us, a small tether in a storm neither of us had asked for. She exhaled, finally breaking the silence. "You shouldn't." The words came out soft, almost pleading, but her hand didn't pull away. "Maybe not," I admitted, my voice low. "But I don't want to let go." Her gaze lingered on me for what felt like an eternity. Then, with the faintest tremor, she turned her hand over, letting her palm rest against mine fully. That simple shift, so quiet, so fragile, felt louder than any confession could have been. The world outside could collapse. The company could rise or fall. But in that moment, in the soft press of her hand against mine, all that existed was the truth either of us could deny anymore. It was the smallest act of rebellion, and yet it changed everything. Her hand lingered in mine longer than I'd thought possible. Long enough for me to memorize the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor running through her fingers, the way her breath stilled as if the air itself had become dangerous. Then, slowly, she eased her hand back, folding it against her lap as though nothing had happened. But the look in her eyes told a different story. She sat back in her chair, her posture trying to reclaim its usual authority, though it seemed weaker now, like a fortress rebuilt too quickly after a storm. For a moment she avoided my gaze, pretending to shuffle papers, but eventually her shoulders sagged in quiet defeat. "I shouldn't have said what I did earlier," she murmured, almost to herself. "About holding everything together, about being afraid." Her voice was uncharacteristically fragile, almost breaking on the last word. I stepped closer, drawn in by the rawness I rarely glimpsed from her. "You don't have to take it back," I said gently. "You're allowed to feel it. Even you." That earned a faint laugh, but it wasn't light-hearted. It was the kind of laugh people used to cover cracks in their own armor. She looked up at me then, eyes reflecting the glow of the lamp, and I realized how tired she truly was, not just physically, but deep in her soul. "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head slightly. "If I fail, it isn't just me. It's this company, these people, this entire life I've built. I've worked too hard, sacrificed too much. If it all collapses, I lose everything." The words were heavy, spoken like a confession she had carried too long. I could hear the weight of years behind them, late nights, unending battles, the lonely climb she had endured to get here. I swallowed, searching for the right response. The truth was, I didn't know how to save her world. But I could stand beside her in it. "I may not understand all of it," I admitted softly, "but I do know what it feels like to be afraid of losing yourself in the fight. And I know you don't deserve to carry it all alone." She blinked, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. Her lips parted, but no reply came. Instead, her eyes filled with something she clearly didn't want me to see. She looked away, turning slightly toward the rain-streaked window, as though the city lights could distract from the emotions threatening to spill over. Before I could stop myself, I reached out again, not to take her hand this time, but to guide her face gently back toward me. 2 fingers rested under her chin, lifting it just enough that our eyes met. Her breath caught. The closeness between us was electric, dangerous, yet strangely tender. For a moment, I thought she might pull away, put the mask back on, remind me of boundaries and rules. But instead, she let herself stay still, her eyes locked on mine, as if silently asking whether it was safe to let me see her this way. And in that silence, with her face tilted gently toward me, the confession wasn't just in her words anymore. It was in the tremble of her breath, the softness of her gaze, the fragile trust she was giving me. For the first time, she wasn't just my boss. She was a woman standing at the edge of breaking, and letting me be the one to see her fall. The weight of the moment pressed in on us, fragile and intimate. My fingers still lingered just under her chin, keeping her gaze steady, and in her eyes I saw both longing and fear, flickering back and forth like the storm outside. Then, suddenly, she exhaled a soft laugh, not out of amusement, but as if she were laughing at herself for letting me get this close. She eased back, slipping away from my touch with a grace that only made the distance ache sharper. "This is reckless," she said, shaking her head lightly. Her voice was steady again, but not cold. More like she was trying to convince herself. "I can't afford distractions. Not now. Not with you." Her words stung, but the tone was softer than the meaning. It wasn't rejection, not fully. It was hesitation, the protective shield she put between us to keep herself safe. She stood, moving toward the window, the click of her heels muted against the polished floor. Her silhouette cut against the rain-slicked glass, city lights glowing faintly beyond her. She crossed her arms as if holding herself together, staring out at the storm instead of me. I stayed still for a long moment, watching her. The distance felt unbearable, yet I knew if I rushed it, I'd only push her further away. "You think I don't notice?" I said quietly. "The way you carry all of this alone. The way you don't let anyone in." She glanced back at me briefly, her expression unreadable, before looking away again. "It's easier that way." "Easier," I repeated. "But lonelier." Her shoulders stiffened at the word, and for the briefest second I saw it, the truth hitting her where she tried to hide it. She turned her face slightly, just enough for me to see the faint tremor in her jaw, as if she was holding back something she couldn't allow herself to say. I walked a few steps closer, careful, unthreatening. I didn't touch her this time. I simply stood behind her, close enough that she could feel my presence but not my hand. "You don't have to let me in," I said softly. "I'm not asking you to. But I want you to know, even if you push me away, I'm still here." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far. She was silent, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, her arms still folded tight across her chest. Then, slowly, her arms dropped. She pressed one hand against the windowpane, the city's cold glow touching her skin. I could see her in profile now, eyes closed, lips parted as though my words had shaken something loose inside her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost breaking. "You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I mean it." She turned toward me then, her expression torn, half defiance, half something deeper, something she couldn't name. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though she might step into me, close the distance again. But she didn't. She stayed rooted to the spot, clutching the silence like a shield. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't surrender. It was hesitation, the sharp, fragile edge of a truth neither of us could avoid any longer. And in her silence, I knew I'd reached her. Even if she wasn't ready to admit it. The storm outside had grown restless, wind rattling faintly against the tall windows as if echoing the tension inside the room. She still stood near the glass, her reflection blurred against the streaks of rain, while I stayed a few feet behind, caught between the urge to step closer and the fear of breaking what little trust she'd given me. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It pulsed, heavy and alive, filled with everything neither of us dared to say. Finally, her voice broke through, low and unsteady. "If this fails," she swallowed hard, her words trembling in the quiet, "I'll lose everything." There it was. The sentence that seemed to define her entire existence. I could feel the weight of it in the way her shoulders slumped, in the way her fingers curled tightly against her sides. I moved before I could stop myself. Slowly, carefully, I stepped toward her until I was close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her body, close enough that the storm outside felt far away. "You won't," I said softly. "Not everything." She turned then, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance, as though daring me to challenge the inevitability she carried inside her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I lose this, if I lose control, I lose myself. My reputation. The company. The life I've built. It's not just work to me, it's all I have." Her voice cracked on the last words, and for the first time, I saw tears glisten in her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, as if even that vulnerability was something she didn't deserve to show. I didn't hesitate this time. I closed the remaining distance, and slipped my arms gently around her waist. She stiffened at first, caught between resistance and surrender, but then her body softened, as if her strength had finally run out. Her cheek pressed lightly against my chest, and I felt the fragile rhythm of her breath, uneven and shaky, soaking into the fabric of my shirt. The faint trace of her perfume clung to the air, delicate and grounding, a reminder of how human she really was beneath the armor. Her fingers rose hesitantly, hovering in the air for a moment before clutching at my shirt, bunching the fabric tightly in her grip. It was the smallest act of desperation, but it shattered something inside me, the realization of how much she had been holding in, and how badly she needed someone to lean on. I lowered my chin slightly, my voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Everything except me. The words weren't planned. They came out like a promise I had been holding in since the first time I saw the cracks in her walls. And as soon as I said them, I felt her exhale, not a sob, not quite relief, but something in between. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she held on to me, the way she let her weight rest against mine, said more than words ever could. The storm still raged outside, but inside the office, something shifted. For the first time, she let someone catch her as she fell. And for the first time, I knew I'd never let her fall alone again. The world outside softened. The storm that had been raging only minutes ago quieted to a gentle drizzle, as though the sky itself had grown tired of its own unrest. The city lights glimmered faintly through the rain-streaked glass, their sharp edges blurred into something softer, more forgiving. She was still in my arms, her cheek pressed against my chest, her fingers curled tightly into the fabric of my shirt as if letting go meant everything would collapse again. I held her steady, not too tightly, just enough to remind her that she didn't have to stand on her own this time. For a long while either of us spoke. It wasn't silence anymore, it was peace. A fragile peace, yes, but one she had allowed herself to step into. I could feel her heartbeats slowing against me, the frantic rhythm easing with every passing second. Finally, she pulled back just slightly, enough to lift her face and meet my eyes. The lamplight caught the faint traces of moisture along her lashes, but she didn't look ashamed of them anymore. She looked lighter somehow. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "You shouldn't be the one holding me like this." I brushed a loose strand of hair away from her cheek, my fingertips barely grazing her skin. "Maybe not," I admitted softly. "But I want to be." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not the polished, professional one she wore during the day, but something unguarded, something real. "You don't know what you're offering," she said, shaking her head gently. "Then show me," I replied. "Whatever comes. Whatever we have to face. Just don't shut me out." Her gaze held mine for a long time, searching, questioning, as if waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. And in that stillness, something in her finally gave way. She leaned into me again, not with desperation this time, but with quiet acceptance. Her arms slipped around me fully, pulling me close in a way that spoke more than words. No masks. No distance. Just her, trusting me enough to lean. The office felt transformed. What had once been a battlefield of papers, deadlines, and endless responsibility now felt like a refuge, a place where two people had finally let down their defenses. The faint glow of dawn began to creep along the horizon, painting the glass walls with a softer light. A new day was beginning, and though the future was uncertain, the moment we stood in was undeniable. When she finally looked up again, her voice was calm, steady, almost tender. "Maybe I don't have to lose everything after all." I smiled, letting my thumb brush against her cheek one more time. "No," I said quietly. "Not everything." Her head rested back against me, and together we stood in the soft hush of the morning, knowing the world outside still demanded battles, still carried risks and sacrifices. But none of it mattered just then. Because in the quiet aftermath of the storm, she had chosen to let me stand beside her. And in her arms I knew we had already won something worth more than everything else,